Do you have the sense at all that there is any linkage between that penny-wise approach and what we witnessed on Saturday?
I don't. It is my sense that space is risky. We do great things at a risk, and we all in the space program were well aware of those risks. It was like our family went every time they went to space, and we did our best and would never launch if we did not think that something was safe. I believe that continues to be the case at NASA, and this was an accident that we will find out what exactly happened, fix it, and move on.
And can you give us some specificity on how to move on? Is it time to build another orbiter? Is it time to spend that money on improving the shuttle fleet, or is it time to move on to a whole new vehicle?
I don't believe we will build another orbiter like the space shuttle, because we no longer even have the ability to do that. We have 3 existing vehicles which hopefully can continue to fly safely to and from the space station, to continue to build the space station to its full assembly complete. Beyond that, yes, I do believe that we should build an additional future vehicle for the transport of humans and cargo to and from space. And we've already got funding for some of those programs in the budget. That's a debate the country and the leadership and NASA need to have, is can we facilitate building those replacement vehicles faster and to make sure that they are safer and less expensive than the current space transportation system. Ultimately, we knew that had to happen, but yes, it could happen sooner.
When you talk about that, you're talking about many billions of dollars in many years. Is it safe to fly the shuttle fleet, do you think, in the interim?
It's too early to say based on what we know of the accident, but I believe that we can make the shuttle safe again and continue to fly it at some rate until we have a replacement. Now, the shuttle budget itself is several $billion a year, and so yes, these are not small amounts of money, but what we're doing is incredibly important to the long-term future of humanity, and we have a space station up, and we need to continue this momentum to have humans explore and expand into space.
Lori Garver, a former Associate Administrator of NASA, now an aerospace consultant, thanks for being with us. We appreciate your insights on this day. Let's turn it over to Norm Thagard and talk about that point that Lori was bringing up here and what I was bringing up, this whole idea of a new vehicle. Much easier said than done. The shuttle program itself was kind of built on the fumes of Apollo. A lot of the technology was inculcated into it. And to start thinking about something radically new involves a tremendous amount of money, like Apollo-level type money, doesn't it?
Well, I don't know that it requires that much money, but a new vehicle is going to require something certainly like the shuttle did. That is a lot of money, and it's several years. We don't want to be in a situation where we can't fly, so we will make the shuttle fleet safe and support the International Space Station.
Let's talk about that support among the American people. On a day like today, everybody is supportive of the space program. Everybody says it's important. Everybody says it's something that is a part of us, a reflection of us, and we feel good about it. But then on a day-to-day basis, as it goes on, people don't pay a lot of attention. How do you explain that?
It's just human nature. But it does mean a lot to a nation. I was always impressed with the Russians because when I was there in '94 and '95, they were very strapped economically, and yet they continued to support their space program despite personal hardship in many cases. And the reason was national pride. They knew what that program did for their country. It was one of the few bright things they could point to, and they couldn't give it up.
And the interesting thing is they still keep it going. It's not easy for them to do it because they are broke, but they do manage to keep the assembly lines going, those Soyuz rockets flying, and they keep Russians in space. That says something about how Americans, how Russians see themselves as a people, and maybe very soon the Chinese.
Exactly, and I think all those 3 nations you just mentioned know very well that there's a difference between a nation that can put humans in space and the ones that can't.
Norm, before we get away, this had to be a hard day, particularly for you.
It's a tough day, and the way you get through it is you try to ignore the purpose of all of this and just concentrate on the mechanics of what's going on, because you'll just break down if you do otherwise.
Reflect on it later in private. Norm Thagard, thank you very much. Judy?
Well, thank you, Miles. As we continue on our special coverage of this sad and important day. It does seem to us that when these sorts of tragedies happen, people often ask why. Why these men? Why these women? But the question on some minds seems a bit more fundamental than that. Here's CNN's Jeff Greenfield.
When sudden death happens, as the whole world is watching, it pushes everything else aside, at least for a time. But already, the tougher questions are being asked. Why do we send men and women into space? Do we need to risk lives to gain the fruits of what space has to offer? The answers begin nearly half a century ago, in a very different time. When the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, the first artificial satellite, in October 1957, its ominous beeps from space sent a collective chill through the American body politic. That chill stemmed from the Cold War. If our adversary could beat the world's technological champion into space, it made us seem more vulnerable. That vulnerability only deepened in April 1961 when the Soviets sent Yuri Gagarin into orbit, the first man in space. The specter of a communist nation dominating the heavens was one big reason why, barely a month later, President Kennedy launched the race to the moon.
Before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth.
That goal was met, of course, in the summer of 1969, when Neil Armstrong set foot on the moon. But a year before that, a motion picture came out that embodied a more fundamental reason for man in space. 2001 portrayed it as a search for some root questions about who we are and the forces that guided us, as well as portraying the first years of the 21st century as a time when commercial travel to the moon was like a journey to Europe.
Okay, Houston, we've had a problem here.
It did not, of course, work out that way. A year after the moon landing, Apollo 13's mission ended in near catastrophe when an oxygen tank ruptured, triggering an emergency return to Earth. After that, the image of Alan Shepard hitting golf balls on the moon lent a certain air of triviality to the whole idea. Two other revolutions helped diminish the hunger for manned space exploration. First, a technological revolution. It enabled unmanned missions to chart distant galaxies, plumb the terrain of distant planets, spy on the Earth below. The whole new world of communications, rooted in satellites, requires no human hands in space. The other revolution was political. The collapse of communism meant an end to the fear of hostile forces in space. Today, the manned space station is a symbol not of competition, but of cooperation, or of diplomatic niceties, as the U.S. invites astronauts from other nations to join. And so the future so many of us were sure would be here by now never arrived. In fact, man has not set foot on the moon in 30 years. The certainty we had that explorers would be walking the surface of Mars was buried in a blizzard of cost estimates. $500 billion, the first Bush administration projected. Yes, there is something deep within us that wants to see mankind walking on distant planets the way our ancestors first set foot on distant shores. But even before Saturday's disaster, that desire seemed more and more like a receding memory. Jeff Greenfield, CNN, Santa Barbara, California.
And that's one of the things we'll look at tonight on Newsnight, 10 o'clock Eastern Time, is whether the country might be even scientifically better off with unmanned flight rather than manned flight. Certainly not emotionally better off, though, the great desire to move on. When we come back, a conversation with a good friend of the astronaut team. We'll take a short break first. Our special coverage of this memorial at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas continues on CNN.